So, Berto, we posted a poll on Patreon asking the patrons what next deep dive they wanted us to do next.
And they picked a light subject, I hope?
They picked a very light subject, which is the current situation with Nazis or neo-Nazis or white supremacy.
So you'll call this one Trigger Alert episode.
Yeah, I mean, really, it was rough for me. When I saw that had won the patron poll, I thought, I mean, first I was kind of excited to dive in. It always is gratifying professionally and intellectually or something to just learn. But I also was daunted by the topic because, of course, it's so large. Where do we begin? When you and I were talking about it, I just suddenly thought, well, why doesn't Berto do this?
Yeah.
Because it's not necessarily a psychological topic. I mean, we're going to get into the psychology
aspects, but yes, there's a lot of history. There's a lot of...
Yeah. Both of us are lay people when it comes to history and politics, so why not have you do it? Looking into this, at first I was thinking, well, how much is there really to say? Because we're not just talking about general racism. We're talking specifically about Nazis and neo-Nazis and organizations that are highly aligned with Nazis, even though they wouldn't necessarily call themselves as such. And I thought, well, maybe it's not such a big topic, but it ended up being a big topic.
Yeah.
There's a lot to talk about. I think it affects us all over the world. I didn't realize this, that the Nazi movement is
everywhere,
is afoot all over the world. Brazil, various countries in Europe.
Argentina. I mean, and I didn't really understand how little I knew about all of this.
Yeah.
I was like, yeah, okay, cool. I mean, I know Nazis. I've seen movies.
Right.
First of all, my historical understanding was petite. And even now, the contemporaneous awareness, I was like, oh, holy crap.
But when you take it all in one chunk of information and you hold on to it for the past 6 weeks that we've been holding on to it, it's very terrifying to me. I think also understand, I think most people would understand that Nazis are the tip of the iceberg. They are the most overt or the most ridiculous, but they represent a movement, a general movement that is very mainstream within white humans, because it really goes all over the world. I was going to say white Americans, but it's white humans, Europeans. It's light-skinned people in South America.
Yeah, and that even Nazis in Germany started with just a few people in a beer hall.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and with the internet, which I thought would eliminate things like Nazis, because I thought with information you wouldn't be susceptible to propaganda.
You can always double check everything, right? You can Google it. And
look up the information on a reputable...
And that people would trust those results and be like, I Googled it. You were wrong. It's fine.
Yeah. It turns out the opposite. I was so looking forward to all of the pseudoscience and then...
When Wikipedia really became a thing.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, man. Great.
Yeah. Free, because back in the day when we were kids, encyclopedias were for rich people and libraries.
Right.
Like I never even had an encyclopedia in my house. I had to go to the library to find out what anything was.
And that was like a book that was published a long time ago and it hasn't been refreshed in many years. And that was it. It was static.
Yeah. With limited entries, really.
Wikipedia is like, peer-reviewed constantly. People are editing and like saying, no, this is not correct.
Yeah, and, of course, Wikipedia makes mistakes, but in
Absolutely.
general...
But then people try to correct those.
But in general, it's...
So it's solved.
Yeah, right. So it's really terrifying. I thought we would start off by watching a clip from Vice.
Jews will not replace us! Jews will not replace us!
So we have these individuals, white people in the South United States, who are marching at night with tiki torches saying, Jews will not replace us. Jews will not replace us. Blood and soil, blood and soil.
It's crazy.
Yeah, and I grew up in a time, not strangely looking back, it wasn't that long after World War II in the 70s. I thought it was ancient history. But when I was born in 1970, it would have been, 25 years prior, right?
Yeah.
25 years ago, I think there was music on the radio that I still consider to be new music. And so I grew up in a time when, and I think we still kind of live in that time, but maybe more so back then because it was more recent, that Nazis were evil, evil, evil.
Yeah.
And the war was very justified. And the Holocaust was talked about frequently. I think there was enough people that were there that you might know someone or know someone that knew someone. And it just goes to show that with time, history fades, narratives fade, people die, and their stories become forgotten.
Yeah.
It's astonishing. I thought that we would never see that again.
Yeah.
And here it is. And I think, long story short, I feel compelled to just cut to the chase on one point that I'm guessing you might have come across too, Berto, or might have always had. And I remember thinking this back when Obama was elected in 2008, that we are winning in a lot of ways, the left, liberals, progressives. I would say just people that understand how the world works and understand how fairness works, and that everyone can prosper in a free society. It's not one group versus another group. It's just when black people have political power, and
it's not zero sum.
everyone wins. Everyone benefits in a lot of different ways. So we are winning in a lot of ways. Not that you often hear about us winning, and even us liberals don't admit that we're winning or highlight the fact that we're winning. But I'm old enough now to know that there are massive strides that I thought would never happen in my lifetime and have very quickly. And because of that, then there's a backlash in the same way that when the Civil War, you could argue, was won by at least people that thought like us.
Yeah.
They were people that believed in equality and believed in sharing power, believed in sharing the vote, believed in economic equality. And, there's a very modeled history and track record regarding a lot of the people that fought for the emancipation. Some of them had their own slaves or had racist points of view. But, in general, they believed in equality. And so they won that fight. Not only the Civil War, which is literal blood, sweat, and tears and death that's happening, the sacrifice of life, but also in the political fights around that time, around emancipation, because there's a possibility that we could have won the Civil War. And I say we because my ancestors fought in the Civil War, people on my white side of the family. And so they fought and died, and they were fighting for fairness. They were social justice warriors.
Yeah.
They were liberal snowflakes that were concerned about racism and about harm to people and about rhetoric that would dehumanize. And in addition to fighting the Civil War, it could have been resolved towards the end without emancipation. There were people saying, well, we still need all the votes and this sort of thing. So the social justice warriors fought for it, and we also got the emancipation, making slavery illegal. And so after that point, you have this backlash, right? Because you have all of these white people who are at their core racist and have been indoctrinated. They need something to do. They feel that they are being treated unfairly. They're afraid of what could happen for maybe legitimate reasons. It's like, I have been harming hundreds, if not thousands, of black people. They probably want to kill me and my family. They probably were like, us white people got to get together and figure out a solution. We got to band together because this could be the death of us, or at least the diminishing of us or something. And so that's when the KKK began, in addition to all sorts of other things. You didn't need the KKK before the Civil War because that kind of dehumanization and harm of black people was just written into the Constitution. It was written into law.
Yeah, there was no threat that you had to protect from.
Right.
Other than maybe, if there were some small insurrections, but that wasn't systemic.
But you had the government and the elite and society completely behind you. Now, tides have changed. So now you have to put the hoods on.
That's right.
And you have to go underground. And you have to commit crimes. You know, it wasn't a crime to own a black person back then. It wasn't a crime to lynch your property if you wanted to. Now, it's a crime to do that. So you have to put a hood on, and you have to march, and you have to be sneaky about having politicians that agree with you, you know, dog whistles and stuff. It wasn't so much that way back then. And so all of a sudden, 10, 20, 30, 40 years later, you start seeing these statues being put up of Confederate generals. And they would say, we're not being racist, we're not anti-black.
Just value our history.
Yeah, we're just valuing those people, our forefathers or my grandpa, who fought in the Civil War.
Hey, I love the Dukes of Hazzard. Yeah. I mean, and the thing is that it's that same, ironically, that same feeling of like, well, yeah, I mean, we should value our history that now is being fought against when the history is not pretty towards those ideologies. But yeah, it was all under the guise of like, what? We're proud of our ancestry and stuff.
Right. And,
you know,
and that's fine, but it's also a dog whistle, as they say, a hidden message or an overt message that's along with it that was also celebrated by a lot of people of watch out black people. Yeah. And we are putting a monument to white supremacy. We're sending a message to our people and everyone else. And
like you can imagine this in Colombia, you know, like, oh, you know, I'm what is it, 60, 70% Spanish, right? So I value my Spanish heritage. So I'm going to put up more statues of the conquistadors and stuff like that. It's like, oh yeah, that is history. And actually, when I was growing up, that was literally what we had. Like those are all the statues.
Does that happen? Is that the same thing?
Yeah, except the next step would be, and was, but you know, would be, well, you know, I like a lot of those ideals. I miss a lot of those ways. You know, there was this nice hierarchy. Like the church was at the top, and then you had the Spanish people, and then the Spanish people born here, and then you don't have to mention race, just like who they are, and
make Colombia great again.
Colombia great again. I miss those days. I mean, look at the architecture from that time, and then that's how, you know, and then you get people riled up, you know, and that has literally happened, just, you know, in different ways throughout the world, you know.
Right, yeah. Right. So when Obama becomes president of the most powerful country and economy that's ever existed in the world by a majority white country.
When a half white person becomes president of the United States.
Yeah. It was another huge moment for these racist people. And what do? Well, they need to do something. So there's a gathering together. It's the KKK of 1870 or whatever. It's literally the KKK of 2009, and a rising interest and the internet, and membership starts to go up. Political donations start to go up. Marches start to go up. And then Trump becomes president on
the heels.
A lot of his rhetoric was about racism and borders, making America great again.
Fairly well disguised, though.
Yeah.
At the time, it needed to be. Now it's not. Now it's getting not disguised, but at the time, it needed to be, right?
Well, kind of. I mean, his first when he announced his presidency, he talked about how Mexicans are flooding over the border and raping everybody.
That's right. Mexicans from the South, you know, not all Latinos, certainly not black people. We didn't mention Jewish people, not just Mexicans down in that border right there.
I'm saying this because if it were a different Republican candidate, I think we would have seen a different result in 2017. But because Trump, and he had all of that rhetoric, why, and we'll watch some clips of videos of why did the racists, the white supremacists, the Nazis consider Donald Trump to be their man?
Yeah.
Why is that? Because if you just hear what he says, it's not overt. He's not, you know, Sig Heiling, right?
Right. But my only point was that at the time, the focus for all this energy, pent-up energy, had to be still, it's the whole Overton window, which we'll talk about, but it still had to be within the realm of like one more square from where we were. People already denigrated the lazy Mexicans constantly and the drug dealers coming in from the South, right? So then he's like, okay, well, that's one more square we can move into. Yeah. But it hadn't yet started with like, oh, the woke rewriting of what happened with slavery. And that hadn't started. We couldn't quite make all those moves right away. But it was the entree. It was like,
Yeah.
it was the appetizer. I mean, yeah.
Okay. So I'm guessing we'll hear more about
Yeah.
that. I'm interested in hearing about this Overton window. And so this reaction happened, and the reaction was already there because of Obama and other things that happened, the legalization of gay marriage.
And let's not forget the risk of a female. Oh, right. I can't. Oh, no. I actually, in this case, I can't because I'm being ironic. Of a female becoming president.
Yeah. So it's this permission of we won the election. The white supremacists would say we've recognized the threat and we have mobilized and we now have won, and it now justifies us, and now we're going to come out of the woodwork. More people are going to flock to us, and we are going to march in the streets. And it just makes total sense.
Yep.
Just like the KKK made sense in 1870, the neo-Nazis and the Proud Boys and January 6th make total sense in light of Obama becoming president and all the other liberal wins that we have had over the past few decades. Along these lines, the KKK did some horrific, and the white supremacists did horrific things from the end of the Civil War until today.
Yeah.
It's not just KKK, it's all sorts of things in our life.
Yeah.
And it's not fringe. It's here. So to me, it's two things. One, it's terrifying, and two, it indicates that we're winning, because if the KKK didn't exist in 1870,
Right.
then it would mean that there was no need for a KKK, which means that we didn't really win the Civil War.
Yeah.
So in the same way, the neo-Nazis and all the Proud Boys and January 6th means that we are winning, but it's still fucking terrifying.
Yeah.
And if you would have asked me, even in Obama's first term, maybe, if we had grown past this stuff, I would have said, I think we have.
Oh, absolutely. When Obama was elected, I thought, okay. I mean, they're Morning in America, right? Like the whole Reagan thing. Like, it was like, all right, cool. This is great.
Yeah, and I know that a lot of people will say that's naive. A lot of black people will say they were not thinking that sort of thing because the same racism and police
But
brutality.
we're not in that community, so I was like, do.
I mean, as a therapist who worked with a lot of those folks, particularly in the past, I had more ground level, firsthand accounts of that sort of stuff. But it still felt like hope and change. It still felt like something has changed. And I think it did. I think it's both. I think things
And we'll talk about that time frame, but there were some increasing indications that I started seeing where my little, if you watch Rick and Morty, my face did the little Morty lips, like where I was like,
the little, the W.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Well, we'll get into that. So, Berto, you have a really elaborate outline you've been working on for the past 6 weeks or 2 months or however long. Berto, let's introduce the podcast. This is the Psychology in Seattle podcast. My name is Dr. Kirk Honda. I'm a therapist and a professor.
My name is Humberto Castañeda, and I work to teach whales sign language.
A couple caveats from the beginning. First off, major trigger warning. The Nazis of today are terrifying and triggering, and we're going to be watching news reports of crimes like Charlottesville and other kinds of things. So every episode there's a trigger warning, so just know that from up front. And I don't want other people to feel what I feel, which is terrified. It's a hard feeling. So you want to take breaks and notice how you're feeling. I think it's important for us to know this because of what's happening today. I don't think it's something that we can ignore. And also, we should not be destroyed by the learning of it. The other thing I want to say is that, of course, people are going to have a lot of feelings about this, naturally. As we talk about it, there might be things that we say that you might not agree with. I can't really imagine that, but you never know. And I just want everyone to know that let's all work together because we're very likely on the same team. We just might disagree about some nuances. So, let's take it easy on us. We'll take it easy on you. Take it easy on each other in the comment section. If in the comment section there are people that are, fly-by-night watchers who are just coming in to troll or to spew their hate, just expect it and deal with it however you want to. And also, understand that this series will probably be many episodes. But there's no way that you and I, Berto, are going to be able to encapsulate even all the various topics that we should be covering regarding today and neo-Nazis. There's too much to talk about.
And we won't get everything right. We will make mistakes.
Yeah, it's if we were giving a lecture and we got something wrong, and you came up to us and said, "Oh, love the lecture, but that one bit, that detail was wrong," that's fine. But if you're just like, you guys are Nazis because you're spreading misinformation, or you're participating in the genocide of a whole group of people because you're not talking about this problem, at this point, after 15 plus years, Berto, I don't have any tolerance for that kind of shit. I'm just going to ban you. For 15 plus years, I've been trying to deal with that kind of stuff and kindly, working stuff out. Even if you're a patron, an ongoing fan, if I hear anything like that toward me or toward anyone else, the only recourse I have is to just ban you. Is just to say you've lost your privilege of communication on this channel or on Patreon or something. Yeah. It hurts to do that, but I don't think it's that hard to be civil. 99.99% of people know where that line is. So anyway, but we're not going to cover, you, the listener, might have a very passionate take on a particular angle of this topic of Nazis and neo-Nazis and white supremacy today. And we might not even get to it. I'm terrified of that happening because this topic is so fraught that it just feels like something bad is going to happen. I don't know what. If you want to give us feedback, we're open. We'll probably end up doing some
feedback from the episodes. Yeah, totally.
We'll probably do chapters later on that will be dedicated to feedback or corrections or whatever. Just know that we're open. That's always my thing. And the best way is to email us through the website through the contact form because it has all the necessary caveats and questions. So do that there. So if you comment on Patreon or on YouTube, it's not certain that I'll see it or that I'll include it in any kind of discussion because I won't know if you are okay with us reading it online. I won't know how to refer to you and that sort of thing anyway. Yeah. So another caveat that I want to provide is that we're going to talk about current politics and we're going to talk about Donald Trump. We're going to talk about Republicans, Democrats, liberals, conservatives. And as a caveat, I want to say that if you or someone you love is a Republican or was a Republican or even voted for Donald Trump, that is different from the overall discussion of what we're having. For us to make connections from the Nazis of the past to the neo-Nazis of the current and to making connections with Donald Trump and other figures, January 6th, this kind of thing. It's impossible for us to talk about neo-Nazis as the patrons wanted us to talk about without talking about Republicans and conservatives and Donald Trump. Are Republicans Nazis? No. There are many Republicans, people who vote Republican politicians who are nowhere near being a Nazi. So that kind of thinking is silly. Now, are there things to talk about in terms of the platforms recently among Republicans that might have racist overtones or flat out just racist underpinnings, misogynistic underpinnings? Yeah, we can have that conversation. But the long and short of it is if you are a Republican and we're talking about Nazis and making some connections, and if you were sitting right here and if you were to say, hey, I'm a Republican, I wouldn't know what that meant. I would say, okay, well, you're a Republican and you have that right. And I have Republicans in my family too that I love. And I don't know what that means. Does that mean you're a Nazi or not? Because you can certainly have Democrats who would be Nazis. So I just want to say that these episodes aren't an indictment on Republicans or conservatism in general. But I think it's important to make these connections. My hope as we move into the future is that Republicans disavow Nazis in a very
unambiguous.
Yeah. You can be a Republican and not be a Nazi and not be racist. That is possible. So I'm not denigrating all Republicans. It's just a connection that you can't ignore. Also, there are racists and Nazis who are liberals as well, now and in history. So.
Yeah, one of the things that we'll find out is that people don't necessarily start with the bad intentions in mind. In fact, usually they start with good intentions. At least they might be selfishly good, but usually good intentions. Really, a lot of what we're going to talk about is how a whole population was influenced to go down a horrific road, and then the effects that it's had downstream to now. And we're trying to, maybe by having this conversation and this dialogue, have some effect on influencing it not heading down the same dark road, because if it remains a minority of people that have Nazi beliefs and they just kind of protest with some placards, but that's about the extent of it, then fine. No harm, no foul. But it's when a lot of people start heading down the same route and more and more and more and more, and then inch by inch, that's where it becomes a problem.
Right. When the Nazis, the neo-Nazis, white supremacists, the white nationalists get savvy with their tweets and their memes and their rhetoric to tap into certain fears that a lot of people have that aren't necessarily related to racism, but the masses can be convinced of racist notions that can result in racist policy and behavior. That happens around the world, not just in Nazi Germany, and we're at risk of it happening today. So knowing this, I think, can arm us with preventing that.
That's right.
So, Berto, lead us away.
All right. So let me paint a picture. You are waking up. It's a beautiful morning. Sun is rising. You look to your left. You see these wonderful crops. The harvest is looking amazing. And the architecture that you marvel at every morning, because you see all these amazing buildings and people going about their business and trading and doing arts and music and having a wonderful time of it. And then all of a sudden, you look in the horizon and a gigantic wall appears out of nowhere. And it seems to get larger and it's heading your way. And you scramble. You're running around town. You're like, does everyone see that? Does everyone see that? And everyone's like, what? And everyone does see it. You're not imagining things. And the thing is like coming. And then you realize that is water. There's a wave of water the size of taller than any buildings we have, and it's coming. And there's nothing we can do. And people start trying to flee, and eventually it gets there, and you're gone. You're gone. Never to be remembered, except maybe only in legend. I'm sure you're familiar with the legend of Atlantis.
Yeah.
What do you know of Atlantis?
Well, Plato, I believe, one of them.
They made it out of Plato?
the ancient Greek philosopher had put forth this story of this mythical island that had sunk under the sea as a way of teaching some points that Plato was trying to teach to his students. He wasn't actually referring to a mythical island that he had heard about or read about. He just made it up as a place to discuss what he was trying to discuss, like a thought experiment.
Plato, Socrates, morons!
Yeah.
You're wrong. It's all real. Plato was kidding when he said it was made up. Yes, you are technically right. In his works Timaeus and Critias, which I've never read, but imagine as if I've read them. He was making an allegory about the hubris of nations and what happens when nations get too full of themselves. And according to historians, he was also trying to draw a comparison between the structure of society in the Atlantis he described versus the Athenian structure of society, which he believed to be superior. And so it was definitely a bit of propaganda, but it was also instructional in nature. Except no, it was all real. So in the story, the Atlanteans, they were a naval empire. They ruled over the seas, and they ruled basically all the known world, that they were super powerful. There's other stories that say that there were these rival, also super civilizations and things like that. But ultimately, they submerged into the ocean. And there's different accounts of why that was. There's folks that try to tie that to the myths, the flood myths around the world, saying that, it was the great flood that did it, or all these things. But that's how it goes. Except that there's a conclave of people historically, even to now, but that really believed that Atlantis existed. And it wasn't an allegory. It was a real place, and that Plato was using it as an allegory, but he had heard these older stories from the Egyptians and from other sources and things like that. So one of the beliefs was that Atlantis was actually an island that was located in the northern hemisphere, very far up north, and that it was populated by a race of Hyperborean, meaning above the Borealis, like in the north, people. These were like super people, basically. Ubermensch, if you will. And they were certainly fair-skinned, and the folks that started to believe this. Like, there was a movement in Germany around the 1900s propagated by a dude named Guido von List. And it was called the Ariosophic movement. And it was basically, Atlantis was real. It was where our ancestors come from. And they were these Nordic, like, super beasts of men and blah, 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 blah. And so there's this thing about the Aryan Nordic master race started to develop, and folks really started like gravitating towards that in these early part of the 19th century, the 1900s, sorry.
Is there guesses or analyses as to why Europeans and Germans would be attracted to this story?
Well, so there was already like a legacy. So these are some of the conjectures. So there was a legacy of the barbarians being like sort of minimized in literature as like barbaric people, right?
Yeah.
But there was a counter-cultural movement of saying, no, the Vikings had great culture, and they were actually super advanced, and they were far superior. And so there was some of that, right? Like, so that the northern people were hardier, they could survive in harsher climates, they were far more intelligent, but they were taller, they were stronger, they were better.
Yeah, there's various different stories or narratives that change either due to data or just people wanting to make up stuff about one's history. But was it also because of immigration from other lands, other people that are coming to Europe?
Absolutely. So as an example...
That's what my point is. It's like usually these ideas don't emerge out of nowhere. They usually emerge in response to some fear or...
Yeah, it's just that it wasn't recent. Like that aspect didn't start in the early 1900s. It had been building because Europe was becoming more and more of a melting pot. But yes, so Hyperboreans were contrasted quite explicitly with the Jewish people. Like there was a direct contrast between these Aryan, northern, godlike ancestors and these Jewish and other lesser people, invaders. And yeah, that was absolutely what was happening. So like they were building this mythology around it.
Wasn't it also in response to just like Slavic people? And
yeah, again, it's all the people that didn't look like those blonde, tall Viking god invaders.
Well,
right?
and people that the average German and Central European and also in British Isles in England, I guess, would consider to be the foreign poor masses.
That's right.
That are immigrating for jobs because of famines or because of political strife. They're coming to their lands to get jobs, and they're walking the streets and seeing them in poverty, and maybe they're committing crimes because they don't have any opportunities or something. And then these fears start to bubble up, and these anti-immigrant sentiments start building. And then in addition to that, you start having these stories of just like, maybe we're special. I feel different than these people. Maybe we're just inherently superior, and I need some excuse to dehumanize them so that we can all gather together policy and law to beat them and kick them out of the country and kill them.
So that was definitely happening, but that's almost too kind to some of the proponents of these ideals because they didn't just mean it for their little country. They meant it worldwide. They meant that they're the descendants of the true master race of yore.
If these machinations and these justifications are true, it doesn't just apply to Germany or your town. It must be a human fact.
Right. It's just that you could imagine being like, hey, listen, we come from a long, honorable tradition, and we want our country to just kind of like stay that way. So we don't like these immigrants and stuff, which is definitely a problem, and certainly what's happening here. But then they were dialing it to like 12, which was actually, no. When I look around the world, no one is descendant from the true original superhumans, only us. And that's what becomes a problem later on, that it wasn't just confined to like, okay, now we've secured our borders. Okay, Germany's now, we kicked everyone out. Okay, good. It wasn't confined. It's like, no, it's the world. Like, we are the inheritors of the world. The Atlanteans ruled everything because they were a super master race.
So was that the underlying
This
foundation?
was one of the key ingredients in the mythology. And why was the mythology
of eventual Nazis?
right? And why was the mythology so important? Because you cannot simply build a movement as big as that, as the Nazis, on they took our jobs. Like, that is powerful, but it becomes a billionfold more powerful when you are told that you're not just crude flesh. You know, you are the descendant of the gods.
Well, yeah, and in terms of what I was getting to earlier is when the privileged and the rich, or the middle class, or those who have versus those who have not, bump up against the have-nots, there's a Y in the road where one direction is, well, maybe we should help them.
Right.
Maybe those are
Maybe
other...
since we're the super people, we should help them.
Well, yeah, I guess. But at the very least, they're like us.
Yeah.
They're not dehumanized. They're just from another land. They
Right.
could have easily, that could be me. And so I should help them.
Right.
The other road is, well, they're different.
Yeah.
We're here and they're here. They will never be here because they're always going to be this. So we need some illogical story to justify
Right.
that dehumanization and to justify the hierarchy. In my deep dive on Nazis, it eventually led me to fascism,
Yeah.
which I, of course, had heard and studied slightly, but hadn't really understood. And with all of our deep dives and episodes on cults, it's just another form, I think, of a cult. Cults will have this as well, of just like, you have to have this magical, illogical, distorted story that separates you from the others, the in-group and out-group, because you have to control your members. You have to also dehumanize the out-group, and it justifies the whole thing, and the people become believers in it. They don't necessarily even do it out of malice. They are looking for something to make them feel better, and so they, for various reasons, attract us. So all fascist movements, and you could argue all cult movements, have some element that makes this group special and different and better and justified in what they do.
Absolutely. And so, similar to how the Spanish church believed that they had God on their side and therefore they could conquer the world, kind of belonged to them, and the Lord people that didn't have that God, they needed to convert them at any cost, right? Similar to how like the Destiny. What was in the U.S. It was Manifest Destiny. Thank you. Manifest Destiny. We are destined to own this land and stuff like.
Yeah, and that's such a stupid thing.
These ideologies are power.
Because even Manifest Destiny, it's like, manifest by what or who?
By that divine right.
Yeah.
And so in this case, this was actually the beginning of because on the surface, Nazism was like Christian, and we'll talk about this a lot more later, but there was this growing new religion that they were adhering to that was all about their divine right from their descendants.
This is early 20th century Europe.
In the early phases of the ideology that became Nazism,
Yeah.
they were developing essentially a new religion.
Timeline-wise, we're talking...
1900.
1900?
Yeah.
Okay.
And it became so official that, Heinrich Himmler, he was one of the biggest occultists in the Nazi party. And like when we think of the Indiana Jones movies and stuff, it would have been Himmler in Berlin. It would have been Himmler like directing all those expeditions and things like that. But essentially, he made it official doctrine of the party that they were descendants of Atlantis.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I mean,
he
I knew...
canonized it. He's like, this is our official doctrine.
Yeah, it's funny because growing up, of course, I knew about Nazis.
Yeah.
And I knew about the Holocaust, and I knew about some other details. And then you see Raiders of the Lost Ark, and you see that at least it's implied or imagined that Adolf Hitler or high-ranking Nazis were really interested in the occult and in religious artifacts. So that's the whole point of the movie.
But they don't explain like why necessarily, other than they're trying to gain powers.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or there's some weird Nazi offshoot that's like looking into
Sure.
the possibility of having some sort of special power. And I don't think it occurred to me until now, of course, I'm sure it occurred to you, that this was a Jewish artifact.
Oh, of course. Well, I never thought about this in the slightest until I did this research.
Okay, I'm glad. Because then later on, I am learning more about Nazis and learning, there'll be some documentary about how Hitler was interested in the occult and, these stories that you're getting at. And I remember absorbing that and thinking like, well, it's probably just that it was a small part of the overall Nazi philosophy. But when I started doing this deep dive and looking more into it, and you looked into it more, and so you're getting into this now, you see that the occult and these myths, this weird cobbling together of speculations of race, and also the confluence of early knowledge about there was data, archaeology, and people putting forth theories as to the movements of people, whereas before people just thought, well, we all just sprung up out of the earth at the same time, so there's these new ideas, and so it's
a confluence, and then what they were trying to do, because they already had, like I said, the legitimacy of they took our jobs, or hey, and some actually totally legitimate complaints about the economy and about the bad policies, and then some short-sighted complaints about the outcome of World War I and its ramifications. But nothing could be as powerful as then they wanted A, scientific proof that they were superior, B, religious proof that they were superior, C, archaeological proof, everything proof. They wanted to build this foundation of like incontrovertible, like you cannot defeat the ideology at that point.
Yeah, and I don't know if you're getting into this, but I realized, I told you that there's a movie about the rise of Adolf Hitler.
You mentioned, yeah.
It came out like 10, 20 years ago. And it's a really good movie because it just depicts, it's just like a biopic, so to speak, of Adolf Hitler that of course doesn't make him look good, but it also isn't directed and written in this way to make him look evil, because we all know that he's evil. It doesn't have to tell us that, right?
Yeah.
But it shows us the progression as we understand the story. And part of the story that I, of course, had always known from studying history was that after World War I, which they called the Great War back then, the Germans had been defeated and had also lost a lot of people. A lot of people died. And it was a very hard time. Of course, the economy was doing bad, and then the world economy crashed in the 30s as well. And so it was a very dark time, and there were a lot of Germans who used to have pride in their community, in their family, in their masculinity, we might even say, in their future. All of a sudden, they're the joke of the world. They are inferior. They lost to the Russians, to the British, to the French.
So it's ripe for the pickings.
So you have all these men who are in pubs drinking into their sorrows away, and they don't have a job, and it's upsetting. And then you have Adolf Hitler and others that come forward and say, I know the problem. In fact, we were betrayed by our politicians and leaders during World War I. We would have won if we had better people in power. Take it from me, I was fighting in World War I. Also, it's the pesky Jews.
Yeah, it's a very, it gives all the excuses. The environment is set up for that.
Yeah, and anti-Jewish sentiment. It's almost like you're born into that if you're a European, even today, and it's up to every person who is indoctrinated into that fight against that their entire life. So he plays into that, and then all of a sudden it was just like, oh my God, make Germany great again.
Yeah, and here's the thing: you can't walk into a pub at that moment and say, hear me. A long time ago, there was this island called Atlantis, and oh, shut up, sit down. You can't do that. You got to start with the here and now. I hear you don't have a job. That sucks. I hear you don't have a job.
The same with a cult.
And then slowly but surely, exactly. Right. Slowly but surely.
With a cult, you say, like with Twin Flames. Have you been watching that stuff?
No.
It's a documentary. Well, yeah. The initial appeal to people is, are you having a hard time finding your twin flame, your soulmate?
Ah, okay.
And so you get people in that the door that way.
Okay.
Before long, well, I won't spoil the
don't
story.
spoil it, but it's like Scientology or whatever. It's like, hey, you having problems in life?
Yeah.
Come on. Yeah.
Right.
So here's the thing. So again, this isn't just some fringe like, oh yeah, some people, they make it official doctrine that they're the glorious descendants of the ascended, godlike Atlanteans, right? And the irony of ironies is that the belief of Atlantis up until that point, by most people that believed or at least knew or thought about Atlantis, was that they were non-Caucasian brown-skinned peoples. And definitely not up north, like whatever. So anyways, this concludes our first section about how there's this setup of like this mythology.
Right. But enough people had probably heard about Atlantis.
Oh, yeah, totally.
And there was some mystique about it.
Yeah.
It's sort of like with QAnon. It's like they just pull together things that people have already been indoctrinated into. There's the lizard people. That's been around for a while.
Use things like that.
Then there's the satanic rituals, that satanic panic.
Right.
And then you bring in the anti-left sentiment, and then you bring in, the Illuminati and the deep state and the elites that control the world, and of course Jewish people.
and what's insane too is that like they could also lean into the flood myth, and actually the fact that they were kind of modifying the. Oh, you thought it was like this Mediterranean No. You can give it this twist. Like, actually, Atlantis was way up north. And that almost gives it like, oh, I didn't know that.
And those leftists, they want you to believe it was in the Mediterranean.
Brown people, don't deny your... Yeah. Anyways, the next thing we'll cover is Tibet and the Aryans.
And that it will be for the patrons of the podcast. So we're going to take a break here. So this deep dive is going to be several episodes, I'm guessing. And I'm already excited to hear what you found out, Berto. And if you want to hear every episode, then you have to become a patron of the podcast. If you don't want to become a patron, you'll get an intro for every episode that will be, half hour or something along those lines. But if you want to hear the whole thing, then become a patron of the podcast. So go to patreon.com if you want to. And by becoming a patron, it is literally making it so that we can do this sort of thing.
Yeah.
There would be no way that we would be able to dedicate this much time to all the different topics that we look into, not only just recording it, but the hours and hours of research and thinking about it and planning. So for the patrons, we polled the patrons and asked them, what do you want us to talk about? And they voted for this. And so we do this for you. And if you want to become a patron, do so now. Otherwise, please take care of yourself because
you deserve it.